frankly, the fact that, Ravi Kahlon has so vehemently denied something that is so obvious to the rest of us really needs to be looked at.
Just weeks before the final voting day for British Columbia's general election, Ravi Kahlon, a promising NDP MLA candidate seeking re-election, has found himself at the heart of controversy over a potential conflict of interest that appears to be a family affair. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, bringing you an update on that story, which includes an interview with Eleanor Sturko, the Conservative Party of BC MLA candidate that brought these concerns to light. On September 25th, Eleanor Sturko, the Conservative Party of BC candidate for Surrey Cloverdale, who was formerly serving as Surrey South's MLA until this year's election was called, sounded the alarm about the appearance of a major conflict of interest scandal involving NDP incumbent candidate for Delta North, Ravi Kahlon. In a statement, Sturko announced that she was calling upon the Registrar of Lobbyists for British Columbia to investigate whether or not a conflict of interest involving Mr. Kahlon, his sister Parm Kahlon, and Glenn Lewis, the founder of a housing development company called Renewal Development, has occurred. Why? According to Sturko, after Mr. Kahlon had been appointed by the NDP government as BC's Minister of Housing, his sister Parm Kahlon co-founded a government relations firm that hasn't registered with the BC Lobbyist Registry called Core Firm. And get this, one of his sister's clients is Renewal Development, the same Renewal Development that Mr. Kahlon can be seen here publicly endorsing and seeking to have the government partner with.
This is a program that we are very interested in. I know that they just received funding from CMHC to expand some of the work they're doing. We're looking at how we can potentially partner with them.
I caught up with Ms. Sturko at her Surrey South campaign office while she's on the campaign trail to talk about it.
Most people recognize that governments don't have money. That's taxpayer money. That is your money. And we want to make sure that in every circumstance, decisions about spending money or partnering with companies are being made without any favoritism, without any bias. And, while I can't say for certain that something has happened that would be untoward in this circumstance, we have a situation where the Minister of Housing has a sister who has a government relations firm. So, they lobby the government. They work with organizations that want to engage with government, either to ask them to consider their policy suggestions or to have partnerships. And so one of the companies that the government is currently partnered with is one that's represented by his sister. And so look, I'm sure that there are other circumstances within government where maybe there are relationships with former, maybe it's family members, maybe it's friends, but that's what these processes are for. We need to have transparency. And in fact, I think what makes it even more necessary for this to be looked at is that when Ravi Kahlon was the Minister of Labor, his sister actually was the representative who was actually directly lobbying her brother on behalf of UFCW. Yeah, a union which she now represents with her company. So, look, perhaps it's all completely innocent, but I think that when it comes to the taxpayers' money, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't bringing forward the concerns and asking for them to be looked at. So we've sent them to the lobbyist registrar because this company wasn't registered as a lobbyist company, even though actually they should be when they're going to be doing this kind of work, or when firms like Core Firm, they normally would have these situations registered. I think also we're going to be sending a letter probably to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner because we just want things to be transparent. I think any reasonable person looking on the surface would say it needs to be looked into. And I think that's all we can do as, I'm a former MLA for Surrey South. And I think, when I look at the job that I've done over the last couple of years, you just look on the surface and you say, if I was one of my constituents or if I was any reasonable person in the province of British Columbia, would I want this looked into? And in this case, the answer is yes.
In a statement to Glacier News, Kahlon says that this is an attempt by the Conservatives to distract from other election issues. He claimed to have no contact with Renewal Development and said his sister is not a lobbyist. In response to the leader of the Conservative Conservative Party of BC, John Rusted, when he also raised concerns about the appearance of a conflict of interest. Kahlon said, "This is false and desperate, John. The housing company in question does not do work with government." So what do you make of what he has to say there? Because I know you've put some things on Twitter that kind of combat that in a way.
Yeah, well, there's a few things. I mean, the NDP loves to, anytime they come under fire for the reality of their own failings, they love to refer to people in the Conservative Party as conspiracy theorists. But, it's not a conspiracy. And I think that the government's own information really speaks for itself, because Minister Kahlon, or former Minister Kahlon, had said, that there was no relationship. They had not partnered. They were not in a relationship with Renewal Development. But the reality is that, here on September 18th, BC Housing, for which Ravi Kahlon's the minister, or was the minister responsible for BC Housing, there's a tweet here, or a post on social media where they're actually thanking Renewal Development. It says, "Thank you to our partners." And Renewal Development is one of those that's listed, and 6 days previous to that, Ravi Kahlon's sister had posted from her lobbying company's account, showing herself with the Renewal Development CEO. And so, look, again, I think it's important to say there may not be anything untowards here. But the fact that we already can see that we have the former minister saying that there was no relationship here, clearly the public can see that there was. That's part of it that warrants the investigation. Look, how is it that you can have, and I would say that, a couple of years ago here, there's actually from November of 2022, there's a post from the CEO of Renewal Development saying that he's hosting his good friend Ravi Kahlon for a panel discussion about shifting the paradigm away from home demolitions. So there's clearly a close personal relationship here. We can see now that it's a company that is partnered with the government. And I think that that's the reason why we have these processes. Processes in British Columbia aren't political stunts. They're about transparency and accountability. And I think that's what British Columbians would expect from a government, is one that's transparent, one that's accountable, one that, is making the decisions on their behalf with billions and billions of dollars that they have worked hard to have, that they have had taxed away to be used for the benefit of other British Columbians. They want to make sure that that is done without, any favoritism, without bias. And I think, if frankly, the fact that, Ravi Kahlon has so vehemently denied something that is so obvious to the rest of us, really needs to be looked at.
I think the public would agree with what you're saying, that they would want to know the answer to this. But what about the timing? It's just before the election, just weeks before the election. What would you say to people who say this is maybe some sort of stunt? Why now did this information come out?
Well, I just learned about this. So, it's normal for parties to do research. They do it all the time. This is just something that I recently learned of. I think that, I wouldn't be doing my job if I would hold this back till after the election. So as soon as I was notified, I went forward with the information. That's been the case while I was the MLA, while I was the critic for mental health and addictions, for example, and brought out the government spending nearly $500,000 on the Drug User Liberation Front to buy drugs off of the dark web. When I found out about other information, for example, that the diversion of safe supply and drugs funded by the government getting into the hands of gangs and being trafficked even into the hands of children. As soon as I found out, I informed the public. That's what's happened here in this case. I was informed of this information. I went forward to the public. Look, I don't feel confident that any of it will be resolved before the election, but I think still it's important for the public to look at this, and they can decide for themselves.
And last question, if it is discovered that there is a conflict of interest here, what do you think should be the next course of action?
Well, if there is a conflict, I think that the appropriate steps should be taken. I think that anyone who is given the honor of being a minister to be responsible for things that impact British Columbians should be a person whose integrity is unquestionable. But I also think if there's not an issue, let's make that public too. Fine. If it uncovers that there is Nothing untoward that's happened. This is totally normal for a sister, for example, to lobby her brother, the labor minister, while she's representing a union. If that's totally normal, then let's let that be said as well.
Since interviewing Sturco, new concerning information has come to light by the BC Conservatives, which allege that in addition to Ravi Kahlon's sister owning core firm, his brother, Sonny Kahlon, also owns a company called Kahlon Developments, which is currently working on a major development project in the Sookview Royal area. The Conservatives are now calling on incumbent Premier David Eby to determine for the public whether or not Sonny Kahlon applied for provincial permits since Eby had appointed his brother as housing minister, and whether or not Ravi Kahlon recused himself from discussions or decisions regarding housing targets in the municipalities where his brother is developing properties. Rebel News sent out inquiries to all key parties related to this apparent scandal, including David Eby and the Kahlon siblings, but I've not heard back yet. But for now, this is Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. The BC leadership debate is right around the corner, so please accept my invitation for us to watch it together. You'll be joining me and my colleague Sheila Gunn-Reid, as well as special guests, on October 8th for a Rebel News live stream coverage of the debate for what is proving to be the tightest, most spiciest election race yet. It's going to be a fun and nail-biting evening, so make sure you head to our special website right now called bcdecides.com to give us your name and email so you don't miss the live debate show.